And we'd like to allow the panel to make some comments and ask some questions of Casey, and then we'll turn the microphone, or whatever we're going to use here, over to everyone else who has comments or questions.
You spoke about emancipation, and that's something, working with the youth that I do, that they struggle with. I work with 11 to 17-year-olds. They're only able to be emancipated at the earliest age 16, and it's about a year-long process. Most of our youth can't find jobs, can't start ticking off those expectations and those boxes that you mentioned. Can you just speak to that a little, about how the legal system advocates for these youth who may or may not have ticked off all the boxes?
In Washington State, we did the first homeless youth manual, which is a 200-page manual that talks about all of the legal rights that homeless youth have. And there are now 3 states and about to be 5 that have this. And it's basically for caseworkers and liaisons and others, because they're the first responders. They're the ones who are seeing the youth. And I'll tell you that legal services, they often have no idea that there's a homeless youth crisis. And so having that connection, whether it's to private attorneys or legal services providers, to be able to work on individual cases, whether it's sealing juvenile records or whether it's family law issues, there's a million different ways that lawyers can help. Emancipation may be one to get somebody excited about talking to a lawyer, but it's rarely the resolution.
And first of all, Oregon doesn't have a runaway law. And so the student, once the parent found out that they couldn't get the student in trouble for running away, then she went after a parent interferal law. And so can you tell me how we could get around that one?
One of the solutions that I think would be great is to make that strong connection with legal services provider. You have in Portland, I know it's different, I know you're far away, but you've actually got, among the minority of states that actually has a program dedicated to youth rights out of Portland, and they have a number of attorneys working on it. You've got a law school with actually one of the bigger children's rights programs. And so my hope is that, and this does not, that you'll get people to actually look at the specific laws around homeless youth, so you, the frontline folks, can know how to protect their rights and what your protection is.
The issue here locally with our homeless youth, people claim, some theorists, that it's all these pressures that are coming in from the outside, the rural districts or people coming in from the South or from the Middle East, that are just compounding what's already present. And from what I understand, most of our localized youth are kids that emanate from Eugene, Springfield, mostly, about 70%. So it's almost like a perfect storm that we're kind of in the midst of. And so I really feel that we, as a community, are totally obligated to step up and work with our government leaders and school folk to do a better job, obviously, because we're losing the battle on not just the front end, but it's worsening, it's widening.
Blame people coming in from out of state or out of county. Blame people coming from other countries. It's a great way to keep anything positive from happening by blaming, making sure that they're fighting against you. And it happens everywhere. Schools are, as I think one of the most important keys in solving this issue, because they're seeing kids for 6-8 hours a day, and they're seeing their lives, they see them coming with the same, as well, clothes and everything. But often people will push the schools out as opposed to bringing them into the part of the solution. Opportunity for lawyers to do work with unaccompanied youth is tremendous, because it's one of the most complicated legal processes. You have to operate in 2 different courts to get relief through what's called the Special Immigrant Juvenile System. You have to get a state court order, and you have to get a federal court order to adjust your status.
The caseloads have gone up. The funding to to hire people has gone down. Absolutely no help for an 11-year-old homeless boy. He had a piece of good luck. He got arrested for stealing and was sent back to Ohio. We are so bottomed out in terms of taking care of people. It's totally heartbreaking.
Because you mentioned that, the shelter where I work, we work with 11 to 17-year-olds, and I do want to make sure the community knows that there is a shelter out there for youth. It is limited. Earlier, one of the speakers mentioned that, we have 10 beds. We do have 10 beds. So people move in those 10 beds and then move out into a stable housing situation. It's not an answer, but it's an option in the community.
Any homeless child or youth has a right to attend school and enroll in school, and they will not be blocked from doing so. And some people say, well, why would you want this 22-year-old and 11-year-old to show up at school? Because you don't want them to disappear. That may be the portal for them getting help. The other thing I was going to say is that the studies show that older youth suffer the exact same rate of neglect as do young children. Now, young children die a lot more at the hands of abuse, but older children suffer the exact same rate. The feds have they've tied the rates of reimbursement to states for child welfare to the old AFDC standard. So you basically got a 30-year-old reimbursement rate, and they have not changed it. So you're going to see foster care systems just churning out homeless youth even more over and turning their backs on them as well.
Police have been systematically driving runaway teenagers out of downtown through things like charging them with theft of services for recharging their cell phones, various anti-camping laws, and various other legal tactics, some legitimate and some questionable. Now, what recourse do these kids have legally?
So there's been litigation, Sacramento, all over the country about basically raising encampments and excluding people who are poor from various parts of town, largely successful. And then there are also some great solutions that I think I heard that you're hopefully starting a community court, homeless courts, which are basically trying to get rid of those fines and fees that have been charged. And the idea is basically, if I've done everything else, I'm an individual who's homeless, and I've done some community service or I've done something else, I should be able to get all of those fines wiped off. There's no sense in putting fines on people when they have no ability to pay. And the studies that have been done have shown that it increases people's perception of the courts, and it helps people get jobs and get housing because they're not being held back by fines and fees.
So I have 16-year-old young men that have recently been, they're fathers now, and due to their unstable, family and generational poverty as well, they run those risks, and then they have added mental health illnesses that we could address that I know tie in with some of the homelessness. Case managers talk about the way they could pay for these type of classes, and sometimes when it's Child Protective Services involved, they pay for it. How can we make it so OHP starts paying for this and we could just prevent it altogether, knowing that there is this cycle of violence already with their parents? So we prevent all this.
There's a national organization called the Center for Adolescent Health and the Law, and they know everything about homeless youth and health care.
There's Saturday Circus, which is a parenting class program for anybody in the community, and that's a free program. And I know that we also at Looking Glass we have a therapist who does not require the OHP.
How do we make the state really buy into it? If they're not going to outright fund, micro housing and those type of things to address homelessness, can they at least start being proactive and see that there's these patterns to where we could make whole families homeless if we don't address their issues initially?
One of the health organizations actually has a grant that you could totally write in that would cover your costs for those kids, especially if they have the mental health issues. NAMI is working in our high schools and in our schools now.
Any youth who's Medicaid eligible, you could take a look at those cases if you look up EPSDT litigation, and you'll see exactly what they got out of those, and maybe an argument can be made with the state that they should just be funding wraparound teams up front, which again would be focused on young people with mental illness and having all of those services, and again, paid for.
I understand that there's a ruling in our district, in our federal court district, that you can't criminalize homelessness if there is no alternative shelter.
Again, it doesn't give the solution, but it does protect the rights of individuals. If I could flip it a little bit and maybe lead into one of the, I think, creative solutions for homeless families with children is an economic argument, which is one of the, again, I think one of the greatest laws for children is that they have a right to attend their school of origin so $18,000 to transport kids back to their school of origin, which is critical and key. But you could actually, if they created housing that some of those families could be in, you could save a lot of that money. The district would save more money. There's studies now. District would save more money than you invest in housing.
And there's 70 to 75% of our families who have youth who are homeless that are living in a doubled up situation, or youth who are couch hopping. And HUD, who is the housing authority, does not recognize those students as homeless. Whether they're in an overcrowded house, or if they're in a hotel that they pay for or an agency pays for, they are homeless and they deserve the right to have a home of their own. And the longer we allow a student to stay out on the streets, the harder it is to get them back off the streets. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to get them connected with the schools so that we can help them get connected with the other programs.
I had a question in regards to the growing gang issue that Eugene and Springfield is facing. We hear about the growing human trafficking amongst particularly our youth, sex trafficking in particular also.
Once they've gotten to be gang involved or sex trafficked, we are going to spend an inordinate amount of money, an inordinate amount of resources. So those 16-year-old dads, if we can't get to them early, it's so clear that we're going to spend a lot of money with not necessarily a high level of success getting them out of that. And the money we're going to spend in public safety and criminal justice is going to dwarf the amount of money it would have cost us to house them and their family. And we could have, again, that 9 years, that $100,000, we'll spend $100,000 easy on any mid-level gang member. $100,000 in criminal justice, easy, in a couple of years. Could have housed somebody for 9 years. It's amazing that people in power don't get this. I mean, it's a simple economic argument. The definition of homelessness that schools have is one of the most critical and overlooked issues, because they're seeing kids at the very beginning of homelessness. Whether you agree that that's homeless or not, they're seeing them at the point where you can intervene prior to all of these other often bad things happening. And if we don't invest in the schools to be able to do that, we're waiting until they get to the services and then they're getting involved in sex trafficking. You could save money within a year just by investing in housing around a very local school. You could save money that year.
I would like to find out more about how do you set up a liaison for the homeless, whether it be in grade schools, maybe colleges. Also, is there a correlation with, or you're finding with the youth as far as sleep deprivation?
Looking Glass does a lot of partnering. Pretty much every youth that we see come through, we're trying to connect to whoever their homeless school liaison is for their district, for their home district. Who's speaking about youth congregate in certain areas of town. We have an outreach team that goes to those parts of town and says, hey, we just want to make sure you know that these services are available. They'll bring out snacks with them. They'll bring out some basic needs things, socks, making sure that they have access to birth control. Is that we have these services, but they're limited for how many people we can provide for because the money just isn't being put into those places. As far as sleep deprivation, I mean, that's something that we see, and that's something that I see as a concern. We want youth to stay in the public school system, but for youth who are on the streets and trying to be in the public school system, that's a really hard thing to do. And so, we've got some alternative schools set up that ultimately would like to help youth once they get back into stable housing, funnel them back into the public school system.
So every school district, regardless of their size, is required to have a liaison. However, with the schools, the rural schools like that Oscar works with, the liaison could be their superintendent. It could be the secretary that does 20 other job titles as well. So not all of them are as fortunate as Eugene and Springfield and Bethel, who all have actual homeless programs where there's somebody that's what their job is. Now, Looking Glass about 5 years ago came knocking at our door in Springfield and said, where do your youth hang out? And there's not really the same environment to hang out in Springfield as what there is in Eugene. And so what we did is we created a place. And so we now have on Wednesday nights a high school drop-in that anybody from even Eugene or any of the rural schools, it doesn't matter. And they can be anywhere between 14 to 22 that they can drop in, they can have dinner, and there's a Looking Glass staff that's there that can do intakes if they need it.
The entire Lane County is supposed to divvy up $60,000. And to me, it's kind of like loaves and fishes. Whatever we're able to do with that little bit of money to kind of leverage it into, so that we can show the state that we are going above and beyond in serving our homeless youth and families. But to me, that's an hypocrisy. For our state to minimize its available funding for schools, but for children, but for our most marginalized and disadvantaged children. There's so few folks on the front lines in the schools. At the district level, yes, there are. And some of them are in specific schools per se, but in my mind, every school deserves to have some sort of person on that front line and not wait until something bad happens before then everyone begins to put money to the problem.
In Hartford, Connecticut, they have a lawyer embedded in the school to work with homeless youth and find the options through the local legal services, and just amazing results coming out of working with youth to either addressing offender issues or other stability issues. It's been incredibly helpful. That having a full-time liaison it makes all the difference in the world. We have a bill in Washington State that hopefully will go through, but $2 million, $1 million to the schools, $1 million to affordable housing that is linked to the schools, and we argue that it will actually pay for itself within 1 year.
But it seems like the way that you reach your city council or your state legislators or your county commissions is maybe to focus in on the money savings in doing these things.
The cost to benefit ratio, I think, would be so much better when you're providing services for families and young children than, as he was saying, when you intervene later.
Right.
And older young adults who are already in the justice system, already are members of gangs or have addiction and mental health problems.
Like Salem has houses where they let the teens go at night, where they have 25 to 30 kids, and every level's like boys, girls, boys, girls. And they help a lot more than 10, like Eugene does every night. They house them multiple, and they actually help them get back in with foster parents and back with their parents. They do intervention, counseling and stuff.
It seems like a natural possibility is to have more after-school programs.
There are a lot of after-school programs in Springfield that I know of that, not just social. I mean, some of it's academic, but a lot of it's social, or anyway, that it's building.
Yeah, keep them busy.
Yeah,
Keep them busy. I know if I would have been busy, I would have turned out differently.
It's how did we get the right story printed in the Register Guard? How do you get the right story in the local TV news network so that people understand more of the realities rather than the myths that are out there for homeless youth or homeless adults? There's just a ton of misinformation, it seems like, out there.
And yeah, just the attitude, the generalized attitude. I get that, wearing my jacket. I'll go out in public and boom, I'm automatically a thief. I'm automatically this, I'm automatically that, because of the way I dress. And I've done that before too. I put on nice clothes, cut my hair, shaved, and they had no idea I was homeless, and bam, I was treated a lot different. So I just think everybody needs to step back, look at themselves, and figure out why they're trying to put us down. What's wrong with them?
The big question in my mind is, how do you overcome that? Because that's a huge barrier to funding programs for, homeless youth or homeless people in general.
I think a lot of the legal, bureaucratic, political problems are created by a lack of empathy. And that can change at the grassroots level when ordinary citizens talk to ordinary citizens.
Ideas of action items that we can do. We listed was a youth resource flyer because it's really, we need to get the word out. Not everyone knows about all these different resources.
I just wanted to let you know we are working on a pocket directory for youth. I have a University of Oregon FHS student that's working on it currently, and it would be shared throughout the community. So she's still looking for resources to put in it. So if your church or your community, something that you're involved in, does something for homeless youth, please contact us, and we'd love to add it to what we're putting together.
A suggestion that I thought was very important is that to get the input from youth about what services of these or other services that weren't thought of that would be most helpful to them.
Creating a Human Rights Commission of all youth, and the youth could report to the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission could report in their behalf. And I think that would go very far, because what I witnessed was peers helping each other, and that went way further than the meddling adults getting involved. The peers really did an amazing job having each other's backs.
My concern is that we start talking about more spaces, more beds, where those who are disaffected and cannot resolve their differences with their parents, largely because of their parents, have a place to sleep, have a bed.
And if you are going to do something, or if you would like help doing something, we have a working group of the Human Rights Commission that would love for people to come to our work group sessions.
We got to remember the connection, the broader connection between the issues. We talk about programs, limited funding for programs. While we fund over $600 billion a year go for the military in this country, 1% of that could really benefit homeless youth in this country.
It breaks my heart to be out there on Sunday afternoons at Occupy Medical, where there's a lot of kids hanging out, many of whom are homeless. But behind the facade, there's really some pretty terrible things. And I like to think in terms of trauma. You know, these kids have suffered trauma. They suffered the trauma of being out of their homes, having to leave their homes. And then once they're out in the streets, there's another whole set of traumas that they have to deal with. Open drug use, sometimes severe mental illness issues, physical illnesses, injuries, and so forth, because of living out on the streets. We really, really need to figure out how to care for these kids, how to stop this whole cycle. We have all these trite sayings like, our children are our future. That's really very true. And the whole notion that youth really should be at the lead and in charge of deciding what should be done for youth is a concept that appeals to me very greatly. So I'm hoping that our next event that deals with youth who are homeless will be an event that's designed largely by youth, that's implemented largely by youth, and that will be totally youth-centric. Which means that we adults may not quite understand why we have to have rap music at a human rights event, but we will have to learn about that. So thank you again for all coming.